Hey everyone, this is the ESOP guy. We are on a journey to an ESOP, and so happy you could join us today. This podcast is a resource that we've created that's really intended to help people as they start to think about an employee stock ownership plan, whether or not it might be the right fit for them. And so in some cases, some companies are selling shareholders are thinking, hey, we want to start this next year. In some cases, they're already in the middle of a transaction. So either way, it's really there to help you and make sure you can be prepared to ask the right questions and the people maybe you're working with. So with us today is Nino Cervi. He is the CEO and president of Progressive Flooring and Services. And we got to do an ESOP transaction last year. And so today's topic is going to be about the ESOP experience that Nino had gone through this whole process from beginning to end. And now his stories, every story is a little unique and different. His story is multi-year. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in the middle of COVID and after COVID. And there was a lot of things that really kind of, I think, stood out to me. So we're going to get to kind of go into that with Nino today. Before we do that, I just want to kind of point out, if you do have an interest in this podcast, please go to our website at journeytoanesop.com, and you can find out more information about ESOPs and other types of topics that might be super helpful for you. So with all that, I wanted to welcome Nino. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today.
Thank you, Phil. Pleasure being here.
Thank you. So I didn't tell you this, but I was going to ask you, I always ask people this question. What's your favorite movie and why of all time? This is a hard question.
My favorite movie of all time and why? I think my favorite movie probably would be Terminator.
Terminator.
Came out in the early 90s, I believe, just because it was so different from anything I had seen before. Just the concept, the special effects, the idea. That would be very much followed closely by Matrix. I just kind of like those type of movies that are.
I love those. Yeah.
Very different and catch you off guard. And
yeah. I'll be back. So cool. That's a terrible Arnold Schwarzenegger, but anyway, I love that too. So that's awesome. So as we start off, it really will be helpful for people to understand what your company really does, and the company is Progressive Flooring and Services. Can you tell us a little bit about your company, and then we'll get into the ESOP story?
Yes, Progressive Flooring and Services, established in 1978, is a specialty contractor that operates on a national scale, providing primarily commercial flooring installation services. From that, we grew to also provide additional services outside of flooring. We are not a full-scale remodel contractor. However, we do a lot of services on a smaller scale, specialty project type level. When a national client with multiple locations has a need throughout the country, we can certainly handle all their flooring needs and other specialty type projects like ceiling tile replacements, trim, handrails, miscellaneous repairs that might be more difficult to get a larger scale contractor to have interest in doing something like that. So we work for a lot of national brands and have multiple locations to support those brands.
Yeah. What's interesting about your business, you're in Ohio, but you have business all over the country. So you have also warehouses to support your business. So you truly are I would say a small business, but doing business all over the country, which is a
Correct.
Unique thing for what you guys do and provide. You provide service to big companies that demand all types of things. So that's got to be pretty difficult sometimes to meet the demands of your kind of customer base.
Yes, and as we grow and enter into different markets, there's different needs. We started out primarily in the restaurant market, which continues to be our primary market, but then that has expanded to the entertainment industry, the retail industry, and then recently we have been getting into the long-term care as well as the C-store market. So every time we enter a new market, we learn the particulars and we adapt our operations accordingly.
Yep. Which when I want to get into that a little bit, because I think what you guys did in the process of doing your ESOP was pretty interesting in terms of diversification, but we'll get there in a second. I really want to start with when you guys first started to talk about this as a board and you have multiple shareholders. Why did you guys gravitate to an ESOP as the optimal strategy for your succession and exit plan?
Well, it all started first because of the 4 owners approaching a time where succession and exit strategy became more a topic of discussion more frequently. You know, I began looking at, all right, what are the avenues for owners to exit the company? And fortunately for us, I learned of an upcoming ESOP forum that I attended and learned about an ESOP. And once I had done that, it interested me and I was able to learn more about it. And then in our next company board meeting, it was something that I put on the agenda and walked the other owners through the various options that we may consider to eventually, exit the company. And in that review process, discussing all the various options, it quickly became clear amongst the other 3 owners that the ESOP was the one of most interest and checked off the most boxes when we, evaluated what did we want, besides, the legacy, the valuation, the timing, confidentiality, complexity and all that sort of thing. So, and then once, we had that meeting and we agreed to pursue that further and learn more, then, game was afoot.
Yep. And now it started. So when we first met, it was really the beginning of thinking through the conceptual to the planning part of the ESOP, and COVID had just started to become an issue. But I remember both of us were like, we don't really know what the impact of COVID is going to be. And so we started doing some planning in the ESOP specifically for your company. What was from that perspective, with a lot of uncertainty in front of you, when you were thinking about like, what do we do next? What was on your mind in terms of, does this even make sense? Because I do get that question from people with times that become uncertain in their business, and COVID was kind of a national problem, but companies move into some years where it's a little uncertain, and then other years. So from your standpoint, what kept you moving forward in the ESOP process, even though you had a lot of changes happening in the company?
Well, just the desire of several of the owners wanting to have a plan in place on exit strategy was what kept driving it. Plus, just going through the ESOP process and all the details that need to be put together, whether the ESOP happened or not, it was a great exercise to really just do a self-examination internally. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, it was not a waste of time and effort going through all the details that we went through when we, began our feasibility study. Because and the other part that was at that time of interest is, in the past, I had done a previous valuation about 5 years earlier, and that valuation was based on past performances, where now it's all based on future forecasting, which was something that I was not aware of at that time. And then you add the whole COVID, picture that really clouded things as far as the forecast. How believable is that forecast? So that was an added challenge that we had to go through at that time.
Yeah, it definitely was a challenge. And I think I would add on to what you're saying. And I think that what's interesting about it for people is the process itself. If you've got the right consultants and advisors, will really help you see other things that are going to be very beneficial to help you frame out. And some people come and they call me and they're like, hey, I think I'm going to do a partial ESOP. I'm going to do a 30% ESOP, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I'm like, I think that's fine, but have you done any of the planning? Do you really know? I mean, do you know what the valuation is going to be? Do you know, the way the structure, the financing is going to be? Do you know how the cash flow in your business is going to work? And all these different things, I don't know. Nobody knows until you really kind of work through that. So even in a very uncertain time, I think with what we were doing was helpful because we were able to kind of plant some data points and then build planning around that. And what really happened is COVID was maybe worse than anybody wanted it to be for your business in the interim. So we had to kind of reshuffle and say, all right, now what do we do? And you guys ended up responding amazingly because you were able to kind of take that and create a silver lining, which was, hey, let's go ahead and diversify our business. So you rattled off multiple types of industries. Before the ESOP process, how many industries were you really in from a concentration standpoint? And then after COVID, when we really went into the ESOP process, where were you? How did you land from that point? So how much new business or new diversification did you guys employ in that process?
Prior to COVID, 60% of our revenue was the entertainment industry, our largest account, AMC theaters. 40% was restaurants, largest account, Darden restaurants. And then we had the rest was retail. Those were the only two spaces. All three of those spaces were hit hard. They were hit immediately. So it was very concerning. But fortunately, end of 2018, 2019, we were already starting to attend long-term care events and wanting to move into that market, which was very fortunate, even though we did not have any clients at the start of COVID. But as fortune would have it, in the middle of COVID is when we first started doing business with our initial long-term care client, which, has turned into a large account for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll add to that too, because I know that you guys it wasn't just a response. It was, you already kind of had plans strategically to do that anyways. It was just the catalyst to kind of dig deeper into those other industries. One of the things I was writing down, I was thinking about, like, for some companies to go through what you guys did, some of them would have just fallen apart, and that, like, we all know that, we've all been in business long enough. But I think the main thing that stood out to me is you guys had a very solid leadership that, decided, hey, no matter what, we're committed to this, no matter what, we're going to move through this, so understanding that that's a really strong value point for you guys from a leadership standpoint. What were your concerns, or what are your concerns going into the ESOP as far as the future leadership of the company? Because that's going to be, circle that. That's going to be something that people are always thinking about. Who's the next Nino? Who's the next, CEO or COO of the company? And so how has the ESOP become maybe a tool for you guys in helping to, start working through that process, or at least like where you are in that process as a resource?
Well, one of the reasons for the ESOP was the retention and recruiting of employees. That was extremely important to replace myself, to start building that upper level management layer, so there wasn't so much burden, on myself. And having that ESOP in place was going to make it, certainly help retain the key employees that I had. And then when we're at the point and ready to start recruiting and finding key replacements or additions to the staff, the ESOP was going to be a valuable recruiting tool.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and I will say that this is one of the things about ESOPs that I think is really helpful for people to know and understand. the idea behind what you guys did right was you started planning early in the process where you were still ready to work out, say 5, 6, 7 years or whatever in your career. Had you not been ready to do that, that's a different picture. That's a much more difficult transition. So what the ESOP does is it allows a company to go through that very flexibly. But leadership is a critical element of any company. So it does get you moving forward in the process, but at the same time, there's no there's no kind of rigid line that says if you don't get this done, this leadership transition done tomorrow, then that's going to be an issue. So I think that's one thing in your story. Now it's giving you the ability to kind of like use this as a tool to work through a good leadership transition plan.
Right.
One of the things that stood out to me a lot in the process that we went through is because you guys have had COVID years, and we spent a lot of time building a very, very solid forecast. And honestly, it was all you, Nino, because you did like just an amazing job on the forecast. But one of the things I wanted to kind of look at is the bank financing process that we went through. Tell me a little bit about that from your perspective, like because what we were doing is we were going to do some financing from the bank and then the rest from seller financing, which is a very normal ESOP structure. What were your thoughts going into sourcing bank financing? What was going through your mind when we were doing that?
Well, having not done it before, there wasn't a lot going through my mind because it was a completely new experience. So that's where I was relying on my advisors, which to me was a very key. I mean, that was kind of the second highlight of the process, is finding the right advisors that could share with me what I should be expecting. But fortunately, I always try to have more than one resource where I need it. So I already had 2 banking partners involved. So it was just a matter of reaching out for a couple others, and we ended up working with one of the banking partners that we already had a relationship with. And having that relationship was huge. That adds credibility. Being able to forecast at a very detailed level to where you can explain clearly, where the numbers are coming from and how. And then fortunately for us, the forecast was very on target. The first 3 months, not so much, but within 6 months, I mean, we were very close. And then by, 9 months, it was even closer. And I think between those 3 things, I mean, it gave the bank enough, confidence that, they went ahead and, extended us that commitment letter, which was, the ultimate goal and achievement. So, but I really didn't know how involved, how detailed that was going to be, and how long it was going to take. I mean, and that ended up being one of the primary differences between the banks, that the different banks required a different length of time to prove ourselves.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the bank we went with within 6 months had enough confidence to do something, where others, they weren't even going to consider anything for at least 12 to 18 months.
Yep. I think that the takeaway too, like you said, having multiple sources was really critical, especially because honestly, as from an advisor standpoint too, what was going through my head is like, I don't know what they're going to do, because a lot of banks, when they do financing for ESOPs, are going to be very, very heavily weighted on the historicals and not as much on the forecast. In this case, and I think I know why, but in this case, we were able to convince the bank, hey, we really are back on a normal, like our normal cash flow is really coming back. COVID was an anomaly. And in fact, we're stronger than we were before because we've diversified, the company's diversified. But I think the main thing I would say that at least my opinion was, the bank saw the character of the company, the character of the borrower, the leadership, behind you and your team, and I think they made a credit decision that was based more on that and their historical knowledge of you guys, that I don't think would have happened on just a kind of a cold basis. Like we wouldn't have gotten there if the bank had come out of nowhere on a cold basis, just trying to kind of prove out the numbers. And I thought that was just like so interesting in the process. And just from the beginning to the end. And partly too, like to be honest with you, I didn't know what they were going to come back with. I had a lot of confidence in their first coming into it. They were the one that did the deal came in first and was very confident, and they were confident throughout the whole process, and then the other ones seemed to be like, oh, lots of questions. And it was, so kind of working through that process as much as you can early on is good. But for you guys, I think it worked out really, really well. And at the end, and this is what I always try to help people with, is have a good banking relationship. Part of that is doing a good transaction, but deeper than that is a long-term banking relationship that goes now past the ESOP transaction and into, hey, what's the company going to do now? What's going to happen with growth and all that. And I think you guys got that out of that whole.
And I was very fortunate, because that was something that I did not know of in advance, but a recommendation I would have to any company that is looking to possibly pursue an ESOP is just that. Do whatever you need to do to strengthen your banking relationship. And if there's another relationship that you can kind of start doing a little bit of business so you have a relationship, I would highly recommend that, because two of the banks we dealt with we had some sort of relationship. The two that we did not, they looked at the numbers, and one I never even talked to again. The other one had a follow-up call, and that was about it.
Yeah.
So if all four of the lenders were completely new to Progressive, regardless of what I was putting in front of them at that period of time, there probably would not have been any deal.
No, you're right. Right. And then what would have happened is you probably would have just held the note, as sellers, which is the fallback, but it
Right.
is not ideal, especially considering everything that you guys are thinking about. Because you do, and I'll segue into this because I think it's a very interesting part of your ESOP too, is an ESOP, when we do an ESOP transaction where there's one owner, 100% owner, and we walk through, all we have to do really in some sense is make sure that we really understand the owner's goals and objectives. And all through the ESOP process, all we're doing is aligning with that goal and objective of the owner, right? When you have multiple shareholders, and you know where I'm going with this, right? You have different people at different ages, and they all want different things. Tell me, like, from your perspective, how was that, because you and me were probably the main, people working through it. How was that for you to keep going back? And, number one, you got to explain this stuff, right? It's like, okay, guys, this is how it works and all that. But ultimately, you got to get them on board to do a transaction. So how was that for you in doing that?
That was very challenging. Number one, like you said, we had 4 different owners. However, one of those owners was the founder, starting the company in 1978, that has since been, retired for several years, 75 years old. The other owner is his son, who's actively involved, but not necessarily up in the management ranks. And then you had a longtime employee that was in his early 60s, and then myself. So you had 4 owners, you had a retired founder, the ages ranged from, 51 to 75. So it was very different. And you also had the whole, legacy and just the sentimental value, being the founder and what's going to happen. But yet, that individual is the one that certainly is already gone, that would want some monies sooner than later, where the others may not necessarily need monies immediately. So there is a wide range of needs and interests, and that needed to be taken into effect. But when we reviewed all the various options and walked through them, I mean, it was the ESOP option that still provided monies, hopefully. That's why the lending was important. It still maintained the legacy, because there are still related parties in the company as well. So it's not like the owners were walking away and there was no further attachment. So that was a big consideration as well. So we had multiple meetings, but it wasn't until the end of 2019 that we all finally agreed, all right, we need to move forward. Time's ticking.
Time's ticking.
So
Yep. Yeah. Part of that helps you in moving it forward because time is ticking and nobody, honestly, none of us are getting younger, right? So you have to something's going to have to go, and you can only analyze this thing for so long and make a decision.
right.
So going into the kind of working through that process with the multiple shareholders, was there anything that kind of you guys ran into walls on, or anything that you really had to kind of like specifically overcome in the putting the transaction together going forward?
Well, the biggest challenge, of course, would be what is the valuation going to be?
Yeah,
As
that's
far
true.
as the detailed process, I did not know a lot of the details at that point in time. It was just all based on the valuation. So, I did my best based on what we had done in the past to come up with a range. And just to step back for a moment to add further complications, we were actually two individual companies at that point that we had to merge the two companies together, and each company had a slightly different ownership mix. So that further complicated things, that we had to merge one company into the other. That changed the ownership percentages, and then we had to move forward, from there. But the valuation, because everyone, before they could even say, yeah, I'm willing to look forward, needed to have some idea, all right, if I went to a third party sale, what might that look like valuation wise versus an ESOP? But then the ESOP gives you some opportunity on interest. So in the end, it's probably going to end up relatively the same. And so then what's going to be good for the employees? What's the timeline look like? How much is this going to cost?
Which I definitely want to ask you. But before I go to ask you about the costs and stuff, I want to ask you, because doing what you've done is very difficult. And I say it's difficult because you're wearing two hats. You're a selling shareholder, so you have the interest of protecting what your asset is that you're selling to this ESOP. Then you also have the role of being in charge of the company, and the company's cash flow and making sure that all of that. So you they're not always going to kind of have a conflict, but in a sense, there's two different roles. How was that for you in terms of going through the ESOP process? And did you kind of struggle at all with that, or was it kind of like, hey, I can go back and forth pretty easily?
The information that was required of me to provide in our management meeting for the trustee, valuation firm, bank, and others, it is information that I'm already accustomed to putting together and maintaining. I'm very much detail oriented, so I always have a detailed budget and forecast and expenses and updated on a routine basis. And so a lot of that was already in place. It was just a matter of extending the forecast. I mean, I would forecast out a year, typically, not 5 years. So that really wasn't, too bad. The challenge was trying to convey what I believe my owners, I'm sorry, my clients are planning on doing a year from now, 5 years from now. And trying to get that information out of our client managers and get them to get it out of our clients, and continually update that information. That was probably the biggest challenge, because I already had a strong group of advisors around me, to get any legal information, accounting information. So it was just mainly the sales revenue numbers. The expense numbers, I pretty much know what our expenses are now. What I did not know is how much would those expenses be going up. But
Right.
the way everything's set up, it can be quickly and easily updated, to adjust and then provide that information. So it was not too terrible. I mean,
Yeah. Well, you did. I mean, honest, and I said this to you before, like your forecast was the most detailed forecast I've ever seen. I'm not kidding. So you probably, when you're done with this career, you probably can go, help build forecasting systems because it was down to the, customer revenue growth goal with the gross part margin per customer. And, it was just very, very detailed, which I think really helped too, because we're trying to work through and put a lot of emphasis on cash flow, normal cash flow. And so what is that really going to look like? And I think you closed the year at pretty much close to what you budgeted in the first year, right? I mean, you guys were.
Yeah, we were less than $200,000 within our profit, and I think
And you were.
$500,000 within our overall sales.
Yeah, that's insane. So as we start thinking about some of the decisions you did make, and I want to ask you this because I know people kind of struggle with this. You guys decided not to do warrants on your seller note.
Correct.
And what was the main reason behind that? Because some people do warrants and some people don't do warrants. And some people look at it as like, why wouldn't I? Right. But why did you guys not do warrants on yours? It's just in general.
Well, number one, we wanted to try to keep this process as simple and straightforward as possible, thinking that would increase our, odds of getting it done and getting it done in a timely manner. And, just mainly just simplicity and timing's sake. And, with the warrants and it just, that just added just another layer of guesswork that I was going to have to do and maintain, and just,
yeah.
I didn't really see it worth it, from our standpoint, having the 4 owners. Now, if there was just one owner, probably would have taken a different approach and maybe tried to pursue that.
I think that's a good point. Cause I just closed a ESOP and they chose not to do warrants either. It was similar. It was multiple shareholders. It was very similar. Like they just didn't want to, make it so, because it can feel so complicated, or it can feel like it's overwhelming, and we don't know what that warrant's going to be in the future. So you have to deal with that cash flow and figuring out what it's going to have to get paid out at. So and it's not right or wrong. It's understanding the benefits of some of these things and figuring out whether or not, it's going to work into what you want this thing to look like at the end of the day. So, so I think that's helpful because some people are, wondering how the decision process goes,
Right. And with that, it's a mechanism that can give you further rewards, but then you're not going to get that without the same mechanism that could possibly take some of it back.
That's right. Yeah.
So it goes both ways. You can't just if I could just do warrants and not do the other, that would be fine.
Yeah. It's all holistic. Yeah.
So I quickly gathered that you weren't going to get the one without the other. Then that was going to introduce another unforeseen possibility down the road that was uncomfortable to the owners, thinking, all right, we're going to do this, but then there could be the possibility that, nope, it's actually going to end up less because of this. So simplicity and, more confidence in what we negotiated.
And get her done, going into the cost, when we first started talking about the cost of an ESOP, first off, what was your thought on the cost, generally, just kind of, you're a good business person. So you were just doing what every business person would do. What's the cost benefit? How do I do this? As you went through the whole process, like how would you help people explain the cost of an ESOP and what you've learned kind of from beginning to now end?
Well, I've learned that there is a wide range of what an ESOP could potentially cost, and a lot of it seems to be, the group, the advisors that you put together and what their motivation is, and then where you want that valuation to possibly come in at, and who you use could be focused on promoting the company to increase the valuation, which is going to put then more strain and pressure on performance once the ESOP's in place moving forward. Or you can try to I just wanted to maintain a very conservative approach. So I did not, and with someone that's going to try to promote a higher valuation, you're going to have a higher cost associated with that to have them on board.
Sure.
And in our research, I knew what firms were kind of in that category and which ones were not. And fortunately, I learned of you and being an advisor. And I like doing things more hands-on. It kind of a more, detailed level, working with the individuals, and I like being part of the process. So I always try to do things as efficiently as possible and not just give it to someone and say, all right, try to go out there and get as much as you can. That was never the objective. The objective was try to make this ESOP as successful for the remaining employees down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's I think it's a good point too, because I think sometimes it's the ESOP transaction is not the same as selling your business to a strategic buyer. You're still around, like you're still there, right?
Right.
You're doing it because you care about not just for what you want to do, but you also equally care about what the company's future is going to be. And so you have to fit those together. And I do agree with you. I think that so much focus could be on, hey, how can I maximize value? But at the end of the day, I think the main thing I would say, and I think this applies to your business and any business, is the centerpiece of all of it is the cash flow. And so really thinking about the cash flow valuation, because it's the cash flow that's going to pay the debt off. It's the cash flow that's going to pay out your seller notes and your interest and all. It is the company's cash flow that we should be concerned about the most. Now, if I try to maximize a valuation, what am I doing? I'm trying to inflate cash flow in a forecast that's artificial. All I've done in that, maybe I got paid more to do it, but all I've done is to set this up for failure.
Right.
Which is a scary concept, because people are going to be there and like, okay, why is this thing not able to function? Well, because it's kind of simple if you think about the variables, right? If it's too high, or if I've structured my debt schedule too short or whatever, then I'm going to run out of money. And that's not a good feeling. If you've ever been through that, nobody likes that, right? So
right. I am very comfortable with the amount we spent. I mean, I've only done this one ESOP. I don't know where it falls. I've heard of ones costing a lot more. But I'm happy with how it all worked out.
Good. So, and it's hard. I'm going to say cost is always a difficult question in the ESOP world. And I think there's still, in my opinion, this is why I asked the question, and this is why I podcast on it, is that there isn't a very good, strong, unbiased answer, I think, in the industry, because people are going to say, well, it costs more because you're getting more. And, so I just think people need to do the research like you did, honestly, and ask a lot of questions. And my advice is, don't take the first, thing that you hear if you go to a conference or whatever, because that's not always going to be a whole picture of what the actual true cost is going to be.
Right.
So, yeah. So now we're kind of getting to that place where I want to ask a couple questions and kind of start closing out. But as you went through the whole process, were there anything that you were surprised about, or there anything that you would have done maybe differently had you known what you know now, because you are an ESOP transaction veteran? You've gone through the process.
I did not see the process as being overly complicated. It was fairly straightforward. I guess the one, I wouldn't say it was a surprise. It was just eye-opening, the whole management meeting, and when the management meeting needs to happen, and the fact that that management meeting is what kicks off the process. So,
Yeah.
You need to nail it
Yeah.
in order for good things to happen afterwards. Because if you don't, things pretty much won't go any further than that. So
Hmm.
the importance of, I knew there would be discussions, but having a formal management meeting and all the players there and that happening right at the beginning of the process was probably the main, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, let me speak to that too, because when Nino is saying management meeting, he's talking about the trustee valuation meeting. Everybody comes to their office, and we spent what, 4 hours, right,
right.
in that room. And the funny part of the story is I actually broke my foot that week, and I had to fly up with a broken foot. So it was just like, oh boy, this is going to even be harder. But we did nail it, and I think that did set the tone for the rest of the process. Even though the process starts, we did like 2 years of planning before we even got to that point. But when we did get to that point, I think we did a phenomenal job. Your team did a phenomenal job. And just like your forecast, the presentation itself was very, very detailed. And one thing about that presentation I wanted to point out, which I thought was super helpful, is what Nino's company did is they took videos of each of the project managers that had customer responsibilities. And I got a sense, everybody got a sense, like, this is how the company really works. And then the depth of the people that you guys have, I think, really came across because we did that. I think that was very helpful for the trustee and the valuation firm.
And to me, you're not just trying to convey, financial details of the past as well as the future, but you also need to try to convey at that meeting the culture of the company, and what that relationship is between your company and your clients and your employees and the management. And I think that has a lot of impact to others' willingness to accept and understand and have confidence in the information in the company. And that's why, bringing individuals in the meeting to speak, I certainly could have done, but they might have been a little more, nervous. Whereas doing it in the video, I mean, they could, be more confident and convey their information, and maybe having to do a couple retakes until they were confident. And I think that was very powerful. And then that same presentation provided a lot of very good information that I was then able to use with the lenders as well.
That's
And
true.
I think that presentation also helped me
Mm-hmm.
with the lender and their credit committee, who went through and viewed that as well. So it was used,
Mm-hmm.
for both purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. And just the valuation point to make is that if it's just Nino and his top level leaders leading the company, that's one thing. But if there's a depth of people that are leadership throughout the rank and file, that's a whole nother situation. So I think that came across very strong and
Right, because it was very clear that the numbers that I had in my forecast was coming from the client manager and communications with the client. So it was not just Nino creating these numbers and backing into a number that he thought was what it needed to be. No, I mean, it was the other way around.
And I'll say one thing too, that one thing that came across in your presentation is youth. And youth is important because, it's like, what's the future of this business, right? If everybody was 60 years old, then we would be like, okay, well, now what are we going to do, right? But I think that was one of those obvious things that come out in those types of things. When you do a video, or I had another client that would just do, like, every single major person was able to present. That's a really very helpful thing. So I think that's a nice takeaway for people to be thinking about. And I think it was fun, wasn't it? I mean, I thought it was a blast.
I mean, it was intense. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a lot of preparation, and the staff was first time they've ever conducted videos of themselves for a lot of people. So yeah, that was that
was pretty
very
cool.
interesting.
Rose to the challenge. Okay, so I guess the very last question I would ask you is kind of what, now this is all done. This was last year. What's on the future horizon now? You are 100% ESOP, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What's on your mind now, in terms of the future of the company?
You've mentioned it a few times, cash flow and monitoring your cash flow, and doing a much closer job to where you're evaluating your monthly financial performance against the plan. And in the past, I would not, map out and forecast my cash flow. I would map out, and forecast what my sales or my expenses, the profitability. But as far as, mapping out where cash flow should be, and then constantly updating that 5-year forecast, because like I mentioned earlier, just I'm always focused about the next 12 months, the rolling 12 months moving forward, not 5 years. So that's a little new and different. So I always got to try to, the next 12 months is the most accurate. Then the next 24, a little bit less, next 36. And the ESOP trustee is always wanting to look out farther than I'm accustomed to. So creating those processes and procedures in place to where that information is always being, monitored and updated, and yet it's not becoming so time consuming to do that. And yet there's always new information being added to that from the client managers and your, clients is very important. So that's what I'm just trying to put that all together so it can happen without me driving it. That's the other piece is getting more responsibilities, in the, next level of management that one day is going to be very much involved moving this thing and maintaining it.
Yeah. So, and you're doing well with that. Obviously it's not been even a whole year yet. So you're making a lot of progress with that. And with every year that goes by, you're going to start to feel more and more at ease with those things. So,
and having an independent director is new. But choosing that individual is very important, and you want someone that you can work well with and understands how you do things and likes that. So there's no friction or issues between that is very important, because that's a valuable resource in my mind to help.
Yeah. And it hopefully enhances your leadership, and then the cohesive leadership there will continue to translate to a good culture, which is really what this was all about in the beginning, is keeping a good culture. So,
yeah. And the last thing that is the challenge is developing that culture amongst the employees, because this was very new. Out of our 50 employees, only 2 of them really had any experience whatsoever with an ESOP. The vast majority had no clue what it was. So now trying to build that culture, understanding where we're starting, having a means of being able to evaluate how well the culture is growing throughout the organization and what employee behaviors, good and bad, do you start noticing are happening, is really the next main priority that I have to get going. Because,
yeah. And maybe in a year or two, we do another one of these and just see where that is, because I think that's a huge, we could do another whole topic on just that. And it's a huge question mark for people, is how do we really get this moving with all the things that we know about an ESOP, but how do we actually use it now? So that's kind of your next adventure in the ESOP process.
And I'm looking forward to putting all that together and, working through that. So I think that would be a great topic.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we are out of time, but thank you so much, Nino, for your wisdom, for your experience. And it was truly a fun ride for me to just be part of it with you guys.
Well, and I do want to add that, we didn't talk much about the selection process, but I was extremely fortunate to have a very good group, and it started with you, Phil, being an advisor. If it wasn't for you, I would have been kind of lost, and I wouldn't have known what pieces I needed to bring together. But that clarity was enough to be able to put together that group of advisors. And to me, that's why we succeeded, because of the people we were able to put together and move forward. So thank you.
Thank you for that compliment. We appreciate it. And like I said, it's a good relationship. So I appreciate just in the friendship that we've been able to build out of it. So great.
Yep. Thank
So
you
thank
very
you guys.
much.
Thank you for listening today. And we will see you guys on our next step on this journey to an ESOP.